Hello, everybody. It's Paul Rabinowitz once again. Um, we're going to be working on some memoir today. And I have a real treat. For the last couple years now, I've been following one of my favorite poets. She's a New Jersey writer. She did her MFA at Drew University. And she always comes up with new and interesting work that I really like. Now, there's two reasons why. First of all, we'll be working with Lynne McEniry today. Number one, her Jersey background shines through. You'll be hearing today from the work that I'll be reading, um, very much invite into sort of a working class world of New Jersey. Now, I grew up in New Jersey, in Livingston. At the time, Livingston was really a working class town. It's changed since, and now it's a little bit more upper class, as they say, or I think they say middle class to wealthy. But in my day, it was a working class town, and most of the people who came to Livingston were mostly from the Newark area. Bloomfield, Newark, Caldwell were the towns that Livingston, that sort of when the Western migration happened out of Newark, many of them settled in Livingston. Lynne McEniry, in the book that we'll be reading from today, is called Some Other Wet Landscape. Beautiful cover design, beautiful artists that she used for the work and for the piece and for the book itself. Lynne works a lot with me. We do a lot of collaborative projects together with writing and photography, writing and music, and so on and so forth. And just last night, we had a spotlight on Lynne McEniry. So that's a spotlight where we get to read her work. She gets to talk about her work. And really, we focus on the poetry that is what I consider accessible poetry. Today, a lot of poets write in very abstract concepts. Sometimes I think it's only the poet themselves that really knows what they're talking about. That's not the poetry that really appeals to me necessarily, because if I don't understand what I'm reading, well, then it's hard for me to even assume that the poet was writing it for other people to understand. However, that's not always the case. And as we know, many times with writers, they'll write for a specific audience. Some poets write only for poets. Some fictional writers or writers of literature write only for those who are sort of comfortable reading literary works. But of course, that is not Lynne's case. So the work I'll be reading today is one of my favorite poems, really, of all time. It's all based on a tray table that we all experience when we go onto an airplane. But Lynne is writing it from a different perspective. And the perspective that Lynne is going to use for this is the perspective of a woman who maybe isn't exactly what we would consider in today's world the perfect size. So Lynne might be considered by today's standards to be a heavy-set woman. And her experience on an airplane, which we know from reading this is her first experience on an airplane, brings her into conflict with a man who is on the plane and not very happy with his cabin partner, so to speak. So we'll get into that in just a couple of minutes. But before I do, I would like to mention once again before we start that those of you who are writing, I urge you, and let me put my microphone in, it's a little bit easier to hear me sometimes through this. I urge all of you who are writing to please reach out to me. Call me if you will, 973-703-5500. I'll put the phone number up on the screen at the end. But that's an opportunity for you to reach out during the time of the video. You can do it before or after. And read me your work. Let me know that you're writing. We'll be back into Laurel circles as soon as we can. Things are starting to improve a little bit in New Jersey. We have the lowest numbers in the state, in the country right now. But I do want to make sure that you're continuing to write because writing during the pandemic is something that is very, very important. It's important for so many reasons, but no less so that it keeps you busy, it keeps you creative, and it keeps you inspired. So important to be inspired by your own writing. So let's look a little bit closer at Lynne's work. I am going to read this, and then I'm going to ask some questions. Obviously, we can't have a discussion back and forth, but I can certainly ask questions that will enable you to think things through about the piece. And then I'm going to give you your prompt. And the prompt is going to be a little bit different this time because we're really going to figure the prompt based on this work. So it won't be as general as it has been in the past. It'll be a little bit more work specific. So here we go. A poem with tray tables in it. The guy next to me on the flight was a nervous wreck, shaking both knees nonstop, taking the in-flight magazine out, then putting it back in, then taking it out again. The window shade went up, then down. I wanted to see the Rockies. It was my first trip ever to the West Coast. Wanted to watch the landscape change, but he wouldn't let me. Plus, it was like he couldn't get far enough away from me in his seat. I didn't want to take out my breakfast. Knew my size was disgusting him, making him nervous. The way he'd glance, the way he watched me struggle to buckle the seatbelt, hog the whole armrest, even as he turned his shoulder inward, pointing both knees towards the window, didn't even want his sneaker touching mine. Like the fat would rub off on him. I wanted to put the tray table down, get my notebook out, write a poem just like this one. But I didn't want him to see my words. Didn't want to hurt his feelings. Didn't want to shame him like he was shaming me. It was too small a space. And besides, I was afraid that the size of my stomach wouldn't let the tray table rest flat on my lap. And it was too small a space there in row 34, seats B and C. Too small and not enough oxygen to bear my shame and his. And so instead of lowering my tray table, I put my hands in my lap and turned my mind away from the tray table in front of me to the tray tables we had when I was a kid. The metal kind, white trays rimmed in gold, each with a Monet fruit still life. Tray tables with thin brass legs that fold neatly flat and hang on a stand for storage. And when the tray tables came out from back deep of the hall closet, we knew something special was going on. Company? Banquet fried chicken in front of the TV. Maybe a rare family game night. I thought of how lucky we were. We didn't have much, But the tray tables were an extravagance, something especially special. And I remembered how we would take the tray tables with us to visit family on the holidays. Our something special to add to the celebration when we had no money for store-bought cake or a bottle of wine. I remember how sad I was the day after Christmas when my mother had been too tired to put the tray tables back into the back of the closet, and one became the latest victim during my brother's hell raising. The metal leg snapped clean in half. And right there on the airplane in row 34, seat B, I mourned. That tray table and the fact that we were then down to 3 every time company came, and on banquet fried chicken nights, so some of us would have to share, or maybe mom wouldn't even let us get them out since there were 4 of us kids and only 3 tray tables. And after the plane landed and we were taxiing to our gate, 34C now opened the window so I could see a runway that looked like every other runway. And I began to think about my destination and if I'd see Mount Rainier from the highway. So I reached under the seat for my bag, and while my head was down, I guess 34C thought if he couldn't see my ears, then I couldn't hear him saying into his phone, "I'll be off the plane in 5 minutes unless this fat bitch does a slow sidestep down the aisle." Until everyone in the 33 rows ahead of us got off the plane, I sat in my seat with my tray table down. It's quite a piece. It's quite a piece of writing. Some might say, is that poetry? It doesn't rhyme. But we know that since the 1940s and 50s, poetry or prose writing doesn't have to rhyme. It is more of a flow that is more prose than it is the rhyming poetry. But here, Lynne McEniry paints a picture for us. It's a beautiful picture and a very sad picture. It's a picture that she can paint with words, using metaphors, the tray table. I don't know about you, but I had a tray table, a snack table we called it, or the folding table. I would come home from school during lunchtime with my sister, my middle sister. I had two sisters. And we were both in middle school at the same time. We would come home. We had a 45-minute break. And there it was, the snack table. And then at night, we would take it out and watch television. I think it was Jeopardy. We enjoyed that, and Gilligan's Island. And there it was, the snack table with a TV dinner with the aluminum foil that you'd fold back. And inside, you'd have the special treat, the pot roast or the chicken, the peas, the mashed potatoes, and then that center dessert. Probably any of that stuff would not be very healthy for us, as today we're much more aware of what we eat. But boy, that apple pie or that brownie, that was the thing. And it was easy for our parents or for my mother because my father was working late. Those were the days where that was the time that my dad was building a business and building his career. So it was very difficult really for my mother, who had to raise 3 children pretty much on her own. Um, we didn't have a lot growing up, but we had each other. And I think Lynne really expresses that feeling when she talks about her mother and the folding tables, and then they broke one, and now they could only have 3 for 4 children, or when they couldn't afford a bottle of wine, they would bring the snack tables to the family get-togethers. And I remember that as well. As I say, we grew up, my father wasn't, he became successful later in life, or when I was already in my 20s as an engineer. But as a working engineer, one working parent back then, things were kind of tough. And I do remember those times. And it was important for him, for my dad, to move to Livingston because they had a good school system for us. But that was not easy for him because the housing prices were expensive, the taxes were expensive for somebody like my dad who was on a regular working salary. So getting back to Lynne in the piece, we see so much happening, so much happening. First of all, we see that this is Lynne's first trip, her first trip. And here it is, her first trip, and she's a heavy set woman. And the guy next to her has no time for Lynne. He wants it his way. He's going to put the blinder down, so Lynne has to see Mount Rainier for the first time, not from the window as she flies over it or by the side of it, but only when she lands. That same runway that she took off from. That really gets to me. It's a beautiful piece of insight and a beautiful piece of writing. And also, when she sort of doesn't want to move because even the mere touch of her skin or her sneaker on his seems like he would really let loose. He just didn't want to know that this person existed. And then, of course, it turns at the end in a moment where the gentleman on his cell phone calls her a name and says, won't be able to get off if this woman does a sidestep down the aisle. It'll be a while. But Lynne takes a deep breath, and Lynne looks out. And Lynne, who is no longer the little kid with the metal folding table, or Lynne now in memory of her mother who had to go through so much and maybe endure so much, put that tray table down. And that guy couldn't get by it. And that guy refused to even ask. So she stood her ground. And many of us who have difficulty, whatever it might be, it could be a physical difficulty, financial difficulty, we learn to overcome it in some way or shape or form. And Lynne overcomes this by defiance, by pure defiance. So what I thought we would do for our writing prompt is I would like to explore a little bit of your own memory of a time that you remembered being different in some way or challenged. So maybe you grew up financially challenged. Your mom and dad were hard workers, but they just weren't making the ends meet. Or perhaps you weren't a great athlete and you were never chosen for the baseball games. Or perhaps you didn't go to the dance because nobody invited you. Well, that was then. And today, you're all wonderful, mature adults who have so much to offer for people like me, the younger generation. We learn from you. So whatever it was that you absorbed younger on, or your experiences that you absorbed when you were younger, now you get to move it and pass it on. So don't be afraid to bring back that memory. Don't be afraid to go deep into the experience of a time when you weren't asked to the dance, or your cousin didn't want to talk to you at the Christmas or the holiday gathering. And you'll have to think about that. And what would be really interesting is to take us to that memory, but then tie it up to today. For example, let's say that memory was about your cousin. You used to go and visit during the holidays, and she didn't want to sit next to you. You were too young. You weren't cool. Something like that. And so you grew up kind of knowing that your cousin wasn't too fond of you. But perhaps now you're best friends with her, or your sister, or the time that your mother maybe asked for something that you just couldn't do. Maybe she wanted you to fix the blender and you just couldn't figure it out. Today, you tinker with machines, something like that, where you tie it in. But that's really important for two reasons. Number one, you're going to have to think about what that incident was. Now with Lynne, it was the tray tables, and really that memory of not having enough money to buy the wine to gift to the host. And that left an indelible mark on Lynne. But then she brings it full circle, and she said, we still had pride. And you can see by the body of work that Lynne creates here, you can see that Lynne and her, I should say not necessarily Lynne, but her poems, many of them deal with pride. Many of them are sad, some are happy, but they all come back to her childhood, or those that deal with childhood experience, they come back full circle in some way. And we learn more about Lynne as the poet. So that's our prompt, to go back to a time when you were young and something happened, you were at a place, you were dealing with challenges of your financial means. Maybe your mom couldn't buy that dress for the prom, so she had to make it. Something like that. And then you're going to tell us about that, and then you're going to tie it into today. And please, I'm going to put the number up on the screen. I urge you, please, do not hesitate to call me. I am very interested in reading your work, or I should say listening to your work as you read it over the phone. So with that, let me pull up the screen. So here is the my phone number. And it's best if you call during the time of, or just after the workshop. You don't want to call during the workshop or during the YouTube, but call me right after. Here's my number. I'll leave that up on the screen. You can copy it down. And if you get my voicemail, leave a message. I'll call you back. And this way, at a time that's convenient, you'll be able to read your work and I can comment on it. So that's 973-703-5500. I hope you enjoyed Lynne McEniry's work, Some Other Wet Landscape. And I'll be back next time with a new work from a writer, from a fiction writer. So that'll be interesting because we're going to go from poetry then to a fiction writer and see how this how this novelist actually puts together their work. So that'll be interesting for the next time. In the meantime, folks, stay safe. I will say that I miss you very, very much. I want to get back to the writing group as soon as we can. However, in the meantime, you can still write. And that's what's so great about writing and memoir writing. Until then, I want to say thank you very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.